In the morning, after they had refreshed themselves, and at the simple breakfast I provided them with, Edita could not contain herself in thanking me. Robert seemed to have liked my kind of simplistic approach to breakfast, with a boiled egg and toasted slices of dark rye bread, and a little honey. He was asking his mother if they could have the same in the morning. After they left, I decided to stay home for a while, needing at least a couple of hours' sleep, and deal with my workload in the afternoon. However, in the evening, while relaxing and pondering on what had happened last night, Edita and her son again came back at a very late hour, surprising me even more. For a moment I thought that it had probably been a mistake on my part to assist them last night. I was certainly not running a hotel. Then I asked myself what had brought them here this Monday night. Her excuse was once again that her car broke down, and she did not want to go to her ex-husband's, and the boy wanted to come here. She thought I was a very gentle and trustworthy person, and believed I would not mind them visiting me tonight also. "But," she said, "if you don't want us, we will go." I was certain that at that hour, just after midnight, she had thought that on humanitarian grounds I would not turn them out. The situation seemed a little suspicious, because under normal circumstances nobody would intrude like this, realizing that everybody needed their personal space. She had my phone number and could call me first, but she did not. There had to be something more urgent or something more sinister, and a child at that age staying up this late was not ideal. I tried to convince myself that this was a once-off situation and that she was in genuine need, especially by dropping in like this with her young son. I could help her as much as I was able as a caring individual, although I was fully convinced that my own family, ex-wife and children never wanted to know about this aspect of me. However, if Edita had a different motive, I would have a huge problem unnecessarily imposed upon me. In my mind I asked, do I not have enough concerns of my own? I was already exhausted, had no proper rest last night, and was hoping to look after my needs, but was hindered once more, hopefully for a good reason. I could hardly send them out on the streets at that late hour, so I suggested that they could stay overnight. I wondered why she chose to visit me this late, and did she know how I would react, or had she planned it all along? Although her persona presented a certain type of desperation, her psychological makeup declared a definite plan she was determined to follow. After Robert went to sleep, she again chose to tell me more about her background, her personal tragedies, and problems without any consideration of my immediate needs. In short, she believed she was directed to me by some invisible force, asking me if I believed in anything like that. In some circles it is thought that the Spirit of God would direct people's pathways towards each other as an answer to their prayers. In other circles it is considered to be people's destiny. Many so-called fortune-tellers, on the other hand, can do great harm while making others follow their dictates in the name of psychic endeavor. Unfortunately, there is nothing to convince me about the truthfulness of these viewpoints, which people have created for themselves for centuries. She could have been the victim of such thought from those eager to sell shadows. I simply had to sleep in my bed, but upon waking up in the early hours of the morning, I found her naked body against mine, and she seemed very content, laying there as if she was my partner. Her uninvited and certainly unexpected closeness was quite a surprise for a man who had not had a close relationship with a woman for a long while. Firstly, I was inflicted with the belief that I should not be unfaithful to my wife, although she hated me bitterly, without naming it as hatred, due to her supposed love of God, considering me evil after my so-called disfellowshipment, constantly accusing me with fornication without it being the case, only having seen me drawing the image of a young lady in front of my children. I also had a number of issues with my own emotional state and life circumstances. Edita was not like my ex-wife, who never cared for me or ever loved me, certainly not like my other previous encounters. She was different. She also belonged to a different race and upbringing. In fact, her behavior, the way it was perceived, was not morally correct or acceptable in any Western society. In total shock, I quickly got up, left the room, and went to the kitchen for a while. From then on, an unexpected, certainly unplanned, and even undesired association seemed to develop, and she often kept visiting me, with or without Robert. These visits did not leave me time to complete the projects I had undertaken, and my business started to decline. I could not tell Edita much, because she showed no particular interest in what I needed to concentrate on. Her interests and dreams were more important. The boy needed to have a fatherly figure around him, and she needed to fall in love again and be romantically involved. According to information, this was nature of Philippian tradition. Her interests had to be of the utmost importance. She considered her educational excellence back in the Philippines as above everybody else's, particularly in Australia. My educational background and lingual skills, on the other hand, were also directly or indirectly undermined when talking with her. She half-heartedly listened to my stories, although not completely spoken of, for I did not desire to tell everything about my issues to others anyway. She preferred me to listen only to her personal issues, dreams, fantasies, previous love affairs, marriage to Gus, and divorce from him. At this stage, she was uninterested in any of the group activities I was engaged in. She had previously been involved with various spiritual or religious activities. I was certainly an unusual person, and not a stranger any more, as she put it. Robert apparently wanted to call me Pops, but I was more inclined to think in terms of her wanting to have a father figure for her son she truly worshipped, and the word Pops was her choice. She spoke to me about my generosity and helpfulness, and eagerly preached about her decision to help me. But what kind of help was it going to be? As a result, the situation took on a different twist. She asked me if I would move into her house in Chelsea Heights, explaining that it was beautiful, only recently completed, had no floor coverings yet, and there was nobody to look after the place when she was at work, and her son at school. She also told me that what I was doing in St. Kilda I could do in her house, and it would save me money, for I would not need to pay any rent or other overhead expenses. Surely transport could not be any issue, as it was so close to her home, just around the corner. I said I needed to think about it, some time to decide whether I wanted to commit myself to such a move. Her house was in a new development site near Patterson Lakes, in a very quiet area. It sounded logical at first, and indeed I might be able to benefit from it if I could use the place like a studio with less overhead expenses. Being very critical of others by nature, I hoped she did not consider me as another of those vulnerable and lonesome people, or simply a naive idiot. Her entry into my life, and the way it happened, was a great shock to my system, and I wondered if it would lead to a positive outcome. If any affair developed, how would she conduct herself later, and how her son regard me? After all, the boy had a loving father, and one could see how excited he was when going to his home at weekends, often spending a long time with him. How would his father react to my presence when I started to live at his ex-wife's home? Had she planned to be intimately involved with me at the moment she met me at the cafe? In all honesty, I could not be certain about her motives and trends. If I decided to move into her house, how would I deal with my own personal problems? Did I really need to put everything regarding my own psychological issues on the back burner once more? I needed to deal with my own dilemmas, however, I could not tell her anything. On further consideration, a person of her nature could have had many other desperados for a partner. What indeed did she see in me? As I said before, I had been alone for a very long time, and it was becoming more or less my lifestyle, and I was beginning to enjoy my solitude. How would I react having a number of people around me? All these issues needed to be addressed before any commitment could be considered on my part, for I did not need to sacrifice my entire life for yet another circumstance of a critical kind. I needed to discuss these issues further with Edita. I could, of course, counterbalance her schemes with another tailor-made one, without her being aware, but I was not the type. Hopefully she did not consider me as an easy subject to entrap. I still cannot get over finding her naked in my bed that night, for it really was a great shock. The motive behind her approach was very clear now, and such behavior is considered, in some countries, as rendering oneself cheap and easily available to any man. However, sensing how sincere she tried to appear, provided a slightly different image. I needed to get to know her better before deciding anything. As a principle, I preferred not to judge anyone, although questions had to be asked. Meeting her associates and friends might provide the information I needed. Normally, males would make the initial approach before committing themselves, but the otherwise was an interesting method. Besides, I had become secluded, hiding away from society, and extremely fearful about getting hurt again. I remained speechless, wondering how something like this could happen to an artist like me, struggling to make ends meet. What impression did I create? Did she think I would accept her direct approach? When she saw the large portrait of the young child, whose image I had drawn in Perth, she exclaimed that I had most certainly drawn her son's image long before we met. She questioned me over and over about how it was possible, although there was absolutely no resemblance. She was convinced that the child had chosen me as his father long before his birth, and that must be why he was so content and happy in my presence, but in reality he was not. She was insistent that her wonderful son needed a real father who cared, at least someone he could look up to. She told me to just think about it and emphasize that we could both benefit. It was certainly interesting to encounter some all-knowing people. Moving out to Chelsea Heights and becoming a responsible adult a child could learn things from, at the same time becoming all ears listening to Edita when she needed to talk about her inner feelings, might have been a positive move. But how would things develop as time went on? Would I also be accepted and listened to? She wanted to be genuinely loved, but would she also love me? Would our chemistry match. Interestingly, Robert started to show me affection the like of which I had never experienced, and it appeared as if he had been instructed to do so. That made me think that in a real world, in a real-life situation, this cannot happen. But then again, I was not fully cognizant about the traditions and trends of many other cultures. She was taking huge risks because she did not really know me, but she obviously knew I could be trusted. In truth, I was as I am always, and certainly do not brag about it. However, could I trust her? How genuine was she? Although it is not my interest, how many partners did she have? Was she telling me the truth? Was her son deliberately conditioned to show me such great affection, as if I was his real father? All these questions were crowding my mind, confusing me. Indeed, I was a happy bachelor. My ex-wife had taken the children away, and I had not seen them for donkey's ages. Probably I was never going to see them again. Now I was trying to re-establish my own existence. In my teenage years, I was interested in other races, and at times dreamt about what it would be like to fall in love with a native of another country, perhaps even someone from Asia or Southeast Asia. During my school days, I had many opportunities as there were students from all around the world, but my studies and later work commitments did not allow time for it. During my marriage, it was unthinkable because I loved my wife, although she did not think so, for she was under the influence of her associates. However, I was now a free-spirited individual, able to experience what I had dreamt about when I was younger. I laughed as I pondered, silently asking, who knows, perhaps life also had this in store for me to experience. Naturally, I have lightly inquired of other friends of long standing to see how they reacted if they had experienced something similar. Some told me how lucky I was, and I should take my chances, while others cautioned me against it. I was all alone, and needed to make an important decision unexpectedly and quickly, but did not desire to become entrapped. The opportunity sounded too good to be true, and frankly thought that I had very little to lose. After much soul-searching and hearkening to the advice of those in my group, I decided to move to Chelsea Heights as long as we remained neutral friends, and as long as I could contribute towards everyday expenses. That would reduce some of my day-to-day costs of living and running the studio, while at the same time helping her as well as having someone to talk to. I had a very distinct feeling of total isolation for a while, but could endure it for a short period of time. However, I found it very hard to consider myself becoming like a second father to Robert, therefore needing to make it clear to Edita that I could only remain as a trustworthy friend. She said that Robert considered me as if I was his real father, and would not mind if I was closer to his mother, and she would be very happy if we could love each other. Several questions remained unanswered. How would this adventure continue? And in the long run, what kind of relationship would develop? Our interests might not also be compatible. For instance, I loved listening to classical music and enjoyed live theatrical performances, even performing on stage from time to time. How about the unique smells which may fill the environment when painting in oils? What restrictions would I have to endure? These issues needed to be addressed, and how would she react to all that after I moved in? I was very apprehensive. I discussed my concerns with her over coffee, and discovered that she was more than willing to have my company, telling me all about her wishes to be loved and accepted again by someone like me. She even told me she knew that we must have met during our last incarnation, somewhere in France. She felt how familiar we were. Charming. Claiming she knew that we were once great lovers. In short, she was a person who needed to be accepted and loved for what she was, and be happy. But most importantly, she needed someone who could show what was right and wrong to Robert, her only child. I could understand where she was coming from. Her ex-husband lived with someone else, and did not want to be pestered by anyone like her. Since I did not know anything about her ex and the father of her child, I could not judge him by what I had been told. I suggested that we remain just good friends, as it was not my habit to rush into situations. However, she was keen for her son to call and consider me his pops. She even claimed that some people thought he was my son after seeing us together. "Maybe," she exclaimed, "Robert was meant to be your son anyway." I needed to remain adaptable and tolerant under all circumstances. Whatever they wanted to call me was not going to trouble me. My friend Ridge was not too happy about mixing with other races in marriage, but was happy for me to share a place with somebody else, for it could be beneficial at the end. He preferred to keep races pure, as he put it. He was unhappy about his inability to travel at ease, to come to see me, but after discovering that I needed to commute to the city almost on a daily basis, and that I could spend some time with him, talking about his musical interests, philosophies, and worries from time to time. Picking Robert up from Elwood Primary, and at times taking him to his dad before meeting Edita to travel back with her, he was ecstatic. At least my academic engagements and interests were keeping me in the city more often. I moved to Edita's at 2 Zeus Court after my tenancy agreement had run out on my St. Kilda accommodation. The state of her house was certainly unexpected. It was just newly completed for a very long time, had no floor coverings, and was extremely untidy. Since she was working, her place remained neglected, and the cats she adored made the place their palace. When the storage company keeping my valuables, like my baby grand piano, delivered my belongings, chairs, bedding, and music system, I felt somewhat nonplussed about where to place them and how to set my sound system and speakers. I preferred to keep my piano in storage and furnished the lounge room with my own chairs, setting the speakers in 2 opposite corners of the room so that they did not clutter the place. Edita valued her bookshelf speakers more and spoke about what a great sound they generated. She kept them side by side behind her seat on the floor or in front of her when I initially entered the room. It did not make any sense how one could enjoy the stereo sound of good music like that, but it was her choice, and I was not going to criticize. She seemed to be very happy about my way of setting the sound system at first, where I also incorporated her speakers in such a way that she could independently listen to her favorite music, or we could combine the system with my equipment, remaining in my bedroom, with wires to the speakers running through a tubing I created from my room adjacent to the lounge. When I played beautiful music, Chopin's impromptus and Mozart's concertos, the whole house was filled with a wonderful atmosphere, perhaps for the very first time. Edita looked at me rather puzzled, and one could only interpret it as definite disapproval. I asked her what she thought of the experience, and she responded with, "But I prefer Elvis and the Beach Boys. Do you think you can play them for me?" She showed me her vast collection of ancient LPs, which contained many romantic recordings from the Philippines and a large number of Elvis performances. We listened to California Dreaming from the Beach Boys and lots of Elvis songs from Blue Suede Shoes to Love Me Tender. Robert appeared to enjoy the experience, but Edita responded with, "Yeah, but I cannot hear any difference between listening to sounds when speakers are put together and this spread-out setting." The next day, when I came home, I discovered, to my dismay, that she had put all the speakers together, side by side, and told me they really cluttered the place. Since it was her house, she had to do what she wanted to do. I realized in that moment that I was going to live without some of my interests and hobbies, which I had developed over the years, yet again. And alas, listening to music openly was going to be difficult, but perhaps doing so in my bedroom through my headphones would suffice for the time being. That had been my experience for a very long time, even when I was living with Magda. Working hard to have a beautiful music system, I was forced into circumstances never allowing me to enjoy listening to my favorite music for years. Even all those years ago, my ex-wife never agreed with me listening to music through the speakers I had proudly built. I decided to place my speakers under my bed for lack of space, and set Edita's speakers exactly as she had them before. She was now extremely happy. My elderly cat and longtime companion, Blink, seemed to clutter her lounge as well, although I said nothing, but her behavior towards my cat was so very clear, and I used to worry about leaving the poor animal on its own, for I was unsure how she would be treated, or even if any food would be given. In fact, at one stage Edita told me that it was my cat, and I was responsible for its welfare. However, from time to time, I heard her contradictorily say how she loved all cats. Her ex-husband never liked them, as he exclaimed, whenever he visited, and occasionally told me he would get rid of those cats, but they were hers. I hoped things would get better between us, but at the same time I began to think in terms of having made a great mistake once again, and agonized that I had seemingly still not learned my lesson. As an artist, I had to be able to listen to inspiring music. As an individual, I needed to be accepted with everything I was, with my hobbies, interests, and belongings, even my pets. In fact, I was entrapped, my financial state being mostly dependent on my creativity. This situation was not creating the right mood and emotions. I was unable to create works of art to display and commercialize. It felt I had no chance to easily run away anywhere. She had me where she wanted me. I was probably meant to be part of the furniture, a father to her son, and a lover to her whenever she felt the need. Many of her friends were of Philippine origin, and that was perhaps the only way to get to know them. I started to become very friendly with all of them, and that encouraged me to continue creating art, but under pressure not to continue at her place. I could not wait until we went visiting them for weddings or birthday celebrations, which I gladly filmed and photographed. However, I was never happy at Edita's. Edita was keen to introduce me to her friends as Robert's pops, although I preferred them to call me by my proper name and identity. I needed to treat it like a joke, and sometimes even laughed at it. How strange it was suddenly being considered as an instant father, while we had not even known each other. Alas, some people have preconceived ideas in which they thought of them being a part of their spirituality, and in this case a possible past incarnation was considered. I was not convinced about it, although the child had almost exact birthmarks, like mine, and some believed them to be signs of a possible past incarnation. For every anatomic or psychological consideration, there can be a logical explanation, but anything other than the scientific research one is familiar with remains questionable. It was of no concern for them to call me whatever they found easier. However, Robert behaved like a friend's child, accepting me as a friend of the family. I am certain that he did not regard me as his flesh-and-blood father, although Edita tried to convince him otherwise. He had his own father and was very happy around him, and his father also cared for him in his own way. Obviously, Edita was not very happy with her ex-husband, complaining about him and his interests in other women bitterly. I did not know the whole story, and therefore I could not judge. All I could do was listen to both parties as neutrally as I could. He was of Dutch origin and had unique experiences with Jehovah's Witnesses. He had been subjected to unusual treatments from them when in Holland, and during one of their district assemblies in Australia. A few of the witnesses were accommodated in a house where they have let some of their sisters in faith stay overnight, but at a late hour a couple of their elders came to the door, demanding that the sisters leave the house unless they were related as married couples. In panic, as if they were committing a great sin, they had been forced out. Gus could not help but express his disgust about that incident, for those sisters could have ended up on the streets or experienced the unthinkable, because the world was also filled with people of ill intent. Because of his rebellion against the Spirit and Jehovah God, he was disfellowshipped. When he visited Holland, some of his associates treated him badly by being disrespectful towards him, for having left his homeland for Australia, and Jehovah's Witnesses completely ignored him, as if he did not exist, for being excommunicated. His experiences were reminiscent of my own story. The very little furniture Edita had a somewhat Japanese style. She also had a few dried flower arrangements and a couple of original Philippine paintings she was very proud of. She had her own bedroom, and the child had his. There were many books spread about the whole room, and a number of cats. My Blinky, a semi-Burmese, black, tall and thin cat, came with me all the way to Perth, for in reality she was my only companion and friend. There were times in my loneliness I used to talk and often cry in front of that sleeping cat. Sometimes she would come to me, as if trying to comfort me, licking my little finger or rubbing her body against my feet and sleeping at the end of my bedding. That cat had seen so many things and had some extraordinary experiences. I'm sure if she had any language skills, she would talk about them. She was the only remaining memory of my family, and I sometimes thought that she perhaps had more feelings as a living being than my daughters and ex-wife towards me. When I was living with my young children, I can never forget how one evening, when I came home, I found the poor animal jumping side to side, with stiffened legs and tall thin tail up in the air. When questioned, my daughters told me they had been giving little drops of Greek ouzo to her, and she was drunk. I really panicked, for I thought she might expire, but she survived. She was one clever puss, and I taught her how to use the toilet properly, apart from teaching her how best to sit on the front on my motorbike when traveling short distances. Blinky trusted me like no other person, and was truly more loving than my ex-family. As mentioned before, when filming Claude during one of those short access periods, Birgit delighted in throwing Blinky on her brother's knees, and the cat clawed his skin, causing pain. Now, poor Blink was experiencing rejection at Edita's. It was unusual and very strange. It felt as if I had to abandon all my interests and start only accepting whatever was Edita's. Other cat was lucky, and thankfully more accepted and loved. Both cats, for some reason, loved sleeping very close to Robert, and he was very gentle with them. Most of the time, I felt as if I was living like a refugee, completely isolated and restricted. I put this experience down to being a new one for both parties, and believed the circumstances would improve. Edita sent Robert to my bedroom from time to time, telling him to go and see his pops, as if I was his father. Although it was good to see that she trusted me, I valued my privacy. Seeing a half-naked child in my bedroom wanting to share my bed was not to my liking, and when telling him to go to his mother, he apparently felt rejected and cried, as she told me, although I heard no cries. However, I loved telling him stories, recording his reading, and teaching him simple painting skills. Who knows, maybe I could start him with a future career. In my early days in Chelsea Heights, one of Regis' neighbor's friends asked me if I could do him a favor by copying another artist's work. It was going to be an oil painting according to Frank Frazetta's Bounty Hunter, depicting a wild alien individual on a scaly alien horse, and with a hunted alien person at the back of the green animal laying there like a piece of rug. The bounty hunter's eyes glowed red. I accepted the assignment and decided upon a very reasonable price. Once accepted, I started painting it, and involved Robert to help me with the eyes to give him the experience and excitement of painting an oil masterpiece. But I needed to sign it with a few short words indicating it was according to the original artist's concept. Edita was extremely excited seeing her son engaged in painting for the very first time. I also involved him with my other paintings. However, soon after, Edita started to complain about the awful smell of turps and oil paint, and declared her house was not a studio or a factory, promptly advising me to stop using the place like this. Can one imagine how it felt for a creative person trying to earn some buying power for the necessities of life? I felt devastated. I was stopped from enjoying music and was now also to be hindered in painting. How would she respond to my photographic skills instead? But that meant to start once again anew, and could take time to build my business into this new direction, advertising, and more. I was now thoroughly regretting my move there even more. Whatever I was able to generate in a monetary sense was just paying my living expenses, including my purported part of electricity and gas costs. Edita was also demanding I share her car running costs, and I contributed. After a while things seemed to settle down, but in truth we had no relationship other than being just like family friends. She often demanded that I give her the portrait of the young lad I created in my Perth studio, for she insisted that it looked exactly like her son. She often repeated she was so amazed that I had drawn his lifelike image long before our meeting. She spoke about it to all her friends, but the image had nothing to do with Robert, and certainly bore no resemblance to him at all. Because of this, I decided to draw Robert's portrait, taking particular care to express his looks and characteristics my work had to reflect his nature precisely, and I was happy when other people have also confirmed this after viewing it. But Edita expressly preferred to have the other portrait I dearly valued and would never part from. This way, I was literally forced to keep Robert's portrait I created in 1991. I will tell you a little more about this issue later. The people who initially wanted to have the bounty hunter had cold feet and apparently could not afford it any longer. Therefore, it remained in my possession. However, I could only display it like my other works of art, under my bed, in a pile, when surviving at Edita's. In all honesty, I was subjected to too many empty promises and hindered in many ways, feeling helpless and cheated. You might think that I might be hardened when I say that I expect nothing from anybody anymore. I learned that every single individual lives, survives, and dies alone. And I finally agree with this German saying, Selbst ist der Mann. Man is by himself. However, one could not run on empty, and so all my efforts in artistic endeavor and other interests have been heavily hindered due to my grave mistake of trusting some people with renewed hopes and expectations. Consider my supposed and unfortunate marriage with Magda, who could only function under Jehovah's Witnesses' directives. I had too many disappointments and unfulfillable dreams as a human being. A husband and father, due to the fanatical judgments of witnesses wanting to control my entire life as well.